So welcome to our paper presentation, Visualizing Business Process Evolution. It's an idea short paper for BPMDS 2020, and these are the authors. It's Anton Yeshenko, Dina Bayomi, Stephen Kos, and Jan Mendling. So our core idea of process evolution analysis is to concentrate at the different subgroups within the process and analyze how they evolve and how they interchange between these process groups. So as you see, the first point is that the processes change and usually they produce spaghetti models. And what we want to do, something similar to what is displayed now on the figure 2. That is, we want to find some subgroups and see how they evolve with time and how they change and interchange and interplay between each other. And on the 3, we see that there are several techniques and several classes of techniques that will help us to develop this idea. That is trace clustering, drift detection, and visualization research. So let's dive right in. So first we want to say that we are concerned with process mining and business process management. And in more particular, we're concerned with event logs and with processes. That are the usual steps that are needed to be performed to achieve some outcome. For example, to assemble a phone, you need several concrete steps in order to achieve that. And usually we find that the representation of these processes are usually very static and do not accommodate the changes that might happen with time. So for example, with the second one, you can see that there are directly follow graph that is usually produced with process mining tools. And they usually are not as nice as this one, not as simple, but something larger that is called spaghetti models. And with this, the problem is to understand what is actually happening in the process. And probably something is changing in the process. That's why there's so much variation. So we want to pinpoint that there are dynamic changes within the process that might create such variations. So for example, now with Corona times, we have completely changed how some of the companies operate. They still try to make a revenue, they still try to sell their products, but they change how exactly they perform their business or their processes. And for that, they find new ways and new processes, and these changes are changing also the processes. And we want to see that. But not only these big and large changes happen. Also, for example, if someone is sick and cannot be performed 100%, and then it causes delays in some time. So you want to also pinpoint that and understand those kind of small changes. Let's move to the background and 3 pillars that our research is relying on. And the first one is a trace clustering. So trace clustering is basically a technique or set of techniques that aims to reduce the complexity of process mining problem. And that's basically to take a huge event log and to separate it into parts that are based on some similarity measure. And that is that these traces within the event log should be similar by some characteristic. And that characteristic can be time window interval. That is, when exactly does it happen? Maybe from 2020 that will be one group, and 2019 there will be second group, and 2018 will be third group. Or trace similarity fitness. And that becomes very interesting and a little bit more complicated when we try to define some measures that measure how similar are these traces. So for example, if everything performed as usual, there will be like one step after that one the other, and then finish of the process. So basically, if this process is performed the same way over and over, these traces can be considered similar. Or maybe if one of the activities is a little bit changed, it still will be similar to this usual process. But if there is something completely different happens, or maybe some other department does the process completely different, then this will have different similarity. These similarity measures can be defined on very different perspective. For example, Levenshtein distance. Also, we can define basically infinite number of these different measures in order to cluster the process. For example, cycle time, price per trace. Then the second pillar of our research or of our idea is drift detection. So usually drift detection, especially in process mining, is finding and pinpointing exactly the points where the process has radically changed. That is a sudden drift. Also, more and more approaches try to understand also the incremental drift that is started to change, and there is just a prospect for change towards some other way the process is executed, or gradual change. That is sometimes there is some in one way, sometimes the other, but in usual there is a trend, or recurrent concepts such as seasonal drift. For example, every summer everyone buys more ice cream, that's why the processes there should be different. Or outliers, that is when the process completely different one moment than the other. For example, if something very urgent happens. And the third pillar is data visualization of change. There are numerous visualizations that were developed, starting with a line plot or a stacked plot or a Sankey diagram or a theme river, and they all try to pinpoint and somehow differently but more efficiently for different tasks, understand how to display and how to make a reader or a viewer to understand underlying concepts better. So we try also to understand which ones of these can be actually more efficient for process evolution analysis. So our idea, that the proposed idea of our mini paper is process evolution analysis. And for that we want to take an event log, we want to build trace clusters, then we split the event log into separate parts, and then we compute some measures on the process, such as time, or maybe like basically what is important for this particular process: time, money, and then we visualize the result and understand how these clusters are interrelated and how these groups are basically changing in respect to each other. So we evaluate our idea or technique. We start to evaluate on two different use cases. And first is help desk log, and here we build theme river graph that contains information about groups of cases grouped by how fast they are. That is, how fast the whole case, how long did it take for the whole case to complete. So basically at the bottom we have the fastest cases, that is, for example, 10 minutes the whole case, all the activities, and at the slowest cases at the top. And basically we split them in equal groups of in a number of cases. And understanding this graph, we have at the x-axis we have time in month, and we have a number of active cases at a time at the y-axis. So this representation already easily gives us idea that around the month 35, all the cases were bringing to the halt. So something was happening, that basically all the cases, independently from how fast they are, they were basically slowed down, and they were not happening there. But looking closer, we can see that there is also variation of how much the slowest cases and how much the fastest cases happen during this time. For example, in the 32 around here, we see that the slowest cases are still there in the system, while fastest cases start to decline much faster. Also here, while slowest cases, there's still not so much anymore slow cases. The fast cases are quickly gaining more and more number. This type of graph lets us understand how efficient our process is based on the time needed to perform the case. So we can see that sometimes in the system there is very slow, sometimes it's fast, or sometimes actually there is not so much cases at all. Second evaluation we perform on traffic fine log that contains the cases used for traffic fine collection in Italy. So here, on the other hand, we did a little bit different. We made clusters not based on time, but here we made clusters based on the similarity measure, and we used Prom plugin for that, and find more details in the paper. And here we can also see many interesting things. First, that is number of cases per time, while still on the x-axis we maintain the months, time in months. So we can see that, for example, the cluster 5 overall was mostly executed, like basically all the similar traces in the cluster 5 dominated all the other similar groups, while on the month 41 it just stopped executing. Basically it declined and slowly died, whilst cluster 2 was maintaining its pace and maintaining a number of cases all throughout the time. And other cases were also quite small. So this is also an interesting representation, even though it's very different. But the main point of this idea that to visualize groups of interleaving clusters or any kind of groups of traces, and visualize them also in a different way, and just to understand how they interrelate. So it can be achieved via different visualization. So with that we come to conclusions and future work directions, because there still can be done a lot of things. So our process evolution analysis can be used as a technique to analyze process executions and to identify undesired behaviors that emerge. And we assume that this is just a first small step of synthesizing research on trace clustering, process drift, and process visualization into one technique. We see that these three different streams do not interplay so much. We see that trace clustering uses basically very basic visualizations and is not used so much with process drift. Process drift is relying on very simplistic line plots without also using so much trace clustering. And process visualization can help for both of these fields to achieve some better understanding of the process behind those event logs. So future research direction can be numerous and different ways. For example, alternative form of visualization could be investigated. Then different KPIs. For now, we look at two different KPIs. One was how fast the cases perform in the system, and second was the number of cases and similarity measure. So different KPIs can be explored. So for example, not only number of active cases per cluster can be plotted on the graph, but also how much money or how expensive is the case. That can also be, and you can see that the price of the case is declining with time, or is it getting bigger, and why? Then you can try to understand why by exploring those groups. And then we can also look at the other form of clustering traces. For now, we looked at the trace similarity clustering, and also we look at how fast the cases are in the system clustering. But it can be clustered in many different ways, as we already talked about. So thank you very much for being with me here, and I will try to answer all your questions on the live session later. and you can still read the paper that is very short and should also give more information on what we were talking about now, and you can contact any of the authors for more information. Thank you.